Well, I thought it was about time to do another little video regarding the question of how to navigate most efficiently through my acalaacala YouTube channel. And before I dive into that, I will mention that I do now have the podcast uploaded to Podbean. I think it's acalaacala.podbean.com, or you can Google acalaacala, and down two or three items, you'll see the podcast. Now, there's only two podcasts on there now, but I do intend to put one up per week by Friday at noon here Eastern Standard Time. So I'll be grateful for anybody that elects to check that out, and particularly if you're willing to make me any kind of a comment to give me feedback on topics or ways of approaching that particular project that you think would be helpful to you. But in the meantime, to be honest, I have so many videos, and I do put each one on one or more playlists, and that's the mantra for this particular video, this particular navigational advice from me to you, if you're somebody who's interested in sort of exploring what's on my channel. I've got like almost 1,500 videos now, but they break down into 57 playlists. And particularly if you're listening to a series, like a series of a number of parts or chapters of a sutra or a scripture, you can definitely go to the playlist and start with the one you're wanting to start with, presumably number one, and it will automatically play through all of them for you. So I don't have the sophistication necessarily, as does my friend Sean, who helps me with some of the uploads that have the Chinese and English text on the screen, where he has done some sort of complete videos like Lotus Sutra chapters 1 through 28, which is just great. But again, just FYI, his videos do have music in the background, and the ones he bounces to me for my re-uploading do not. So depending on what your preference is in that regard, that's something to keep in mind. But anyhow, I thought I would kind of use this to informally go through what these playlists are, keeping in mind that I have not rehearsed this, and I may be rusty on actually recalling what I've put in some of them, but it may give you an idea because, again, playlists are the key and the best way to navigate through my site, in my opinion, so that you can identify what you most are interested in. Because even though, as I've said more than once, I'm a dedicated Shin Buddhist, Jodo Shinshu, who relies upon Amida for my rebirth in the Pure Land, I do believe and am firmly convinced, in accordance with the notion of expedient means or skillful means or tactfulness that we see, particularly in chapter 2 of the Lotus Sutra, that the way the Buddha intended for teachings to be promulgated was in terms of approaches that different people could relate to as a function of their different personalities and spiritual needs. So in that sense, I have not at all restricted myself to orthodox Jodo Shinshu kinds of teachings on my site, although I will mention that insofar as my podcast, I am focusing that on Pure Land, but even there, not exclusively on Shinran's version of the Pure Land teaching. So here we go with some of these podcasts, and I'll just sort of free associate with each one in terms of what I think it includes. So you've got Mahayana Buddhist Wisdom translated by Kahns, and that's Edward Kahns. He's perhaps the foremost translator of Prajnaparamita scriptures, and even though, he did his translating a number of years ago, I find his translations to be very satisfying. And of course, I find the Prajnaparamita sutras and scriptures in general to be very satisfying. And I know for a fact that there are some of you out there that also appreciate these wisdom sutras, perfection of wisdom sutras. So in that particular playlist, I've tried to put together all of those scriptures of various kinds that Edward Kahns has translated. And then we have from BDK's The Teaching of Buddha. Now, that Teaching of Buddha is a book that has been distributed probably more widely than any other book on Buddhism. Numata, the businessman who has been very supportive of Buddhist kinds of projects around the world over many, many years, sort of had his people at the Numata Center put this book together. And frankly, for example, I live in the United States, and what I'm told is like in Hawaii, where there are a lot of Buddhists, this is a book that's in the hotel rooms, and just analogous to having the Bible in the hotel rooms as we have here in the continental United States. But in any case, I started reciting some from that, but two things. One, it's already out there in audio form, so it would have been redundant. But plus, I think the way that this volume was approached, it's kind of amalgam from various sources. And even though those are identified within the volume, within a given chapter, it's not clear what pieces came from what sources simply by reciting a chapter or a section from the book. So that, to my mind, it wasn't quite as attractive as some of the other material that I would be able to spend my time reciting. Then we have the Tianchai Tendai playlist, which includes some of the pretty amazing and unusual interpretations of Tianchai of Zipperin, but also some of the classical explanations of Tendai. And Tianchai was the Chinese form of this approach that attempted to create some synchronization, is I believe the word, of the various approaches in Buddhism, and preach the middle way, or the mean, between emptiness and a more mundane kind of perspective on reality. But in any case, again, it started with Qi in China and went on to be followed in a major way in Japan, which refer to it as the Tendai school. And I have recited some of the actual explanations of Tendai that were given to the emperor, the one who wanted the different schools of Buddhism to give explanations of how their particular school ranked, or how it approached the Dharma relative to the other schools. So some of you, even though that's kind of dry and academic, if you will, some of you may find that of interest. Then we've got Buddhism for the Young, or Young at Heart. And of course, these are some of the Jataka tales. And these have been quite popular on my channel, actually. And so if you have youngsters, or if you want to have a lighter fare, if you will, the Jataka tales, as I understand it, or Jataka, I should say, tales, supposedly tell of previous lives of the Buddha when he was in the form of various animals who conducted themselves in highly altruistic ways consistent with the compassion associated with Buddhahood. The Lalivistara Sutra, it's got some beautiful verses in it. It's a 2-volume set, and so if you just simply want something that's very pleasing to sort of contemplate on in terms of the Dharma, that may be one of interest. The Dhammapada, I can't recall how much of that done. I think what I did there was some of the Chinese Dhammapada. And of course, the Dhammapada is an extremely popular, particularly Theravadan text that gives basic moral teachings, is my impression. And of course, there are many, many translations of it. Gil Fronsdal does an excellent one. And so actually, what I would recommend if you have an interest in the Dhammapada is going ahead and getting the volume. It's not that long, and it's got some wonderful aphorisms or sayings that help us to lead a more moral life. And then we've got Harold Stewart on Buddhism. Harold Stewart was somebody who I really appreciated in my early days of having converted to Buddhism or been turned on to Buddhism. Actually, it was some of his writing on Jodo Shinshu that helped me appreciate the Pure Land path. So his book has haiku in it. It has beautiful little paintings in it. But most importantly, from my perspective, it has explanations of the different aspects of the Dharma. And so I've recited some of those here. And I've given a reference to the book. It's a beautiful little book. Chime of Wind Bells, I believe it's called. If you want to give that as a gift to somebody at some point, it would make a wonderful gift. Nagarjuna is another playlist, and there I've done a complete unabridged version of one of his main texts, which is very, very hard to fathom. But if you want to slog through it and appreciate the amazing intelligence of this Buddhist philosopher practitioner who, frankly, has been identified by many schools as being the first patriarch, including Pure Land Buddhism, because he identified the fact that there is a hard way, a way of sages, as well as an easy path for people to follow who are interested in the Dharma, but who don't have the capability of following the path of sages. I've done a little bit on Shinryu Suzuki, and to be honest, I've had the fantasy, and I'm happy for any feedback anybody wants to give, of doing some of his Zen Mind Beginner's Mind, but focusing on his wisdom and his philosophy rather than on his practice, which in a way is kind of unfair because really the thrust of the book has to do with practice. But I also find many of his sort of comments related to the nature of ourselves and of the Dharma and of the Buddha as being profoundly meaningful. Then we've got a Buddhist Bible, and that was one of the early books that I focused in on, which has excerpts from various sutras as well as complete versions of things like the Heart Sutra and the Diamond Sutra. And even though Goddard, who edited that book and translated much of it, he was very, as an early Westerner into Buddhism, very spiritually oriented, and some of the translations perhaps can be criticized for being maybe more loosey-goosey, that nevertheless they were, again, very meaningful to me early on, and I still enjoy focusing on them. And frankly, this is one of the few books that has a variety of Buddhist sutras and scriptures all in one volume. So I would recommend you look at that if that's what you are interested in getting. Ippen, we have a playlist that focuses on Ippen's poems. Somebody wanted those, and a number of you have enjoyed them. He's a Pureland Buddhist, I believe, not a Shinshu person, but his poems are quite meaningful, quite inspiring, actually. Next, I'll mention a playlist called About Shinran's Writings, and many of these are from academics and practitioners in Japan in association with the 2-volume set on Shinran's writings, and these are excellent if you want to gain more of an insight as to what was Shinran meaning when he wrote these various amazing texts like the Kaogao Shinsho and the texts pertaining to the nature of the Pure Land and how the patriarchs fit into the whole picture regarding this particular doctrine. The Awakening of Faith, it's not technically a sutra, but it is a very profound description in more linear terms of the nature of particularly Yogacara type philosophy within Buddhism. And so this was something that I got exposed to early on and actually bought multiple copies of it and gave it to friends as something that I felt like, had the potential of explaining, again, in more understandable terms, some of the aspects of the Buddha Dharma. We've got Yogacara, where I say also see the Lankavatara. Yogacara, I can't recall the details of what I put in that, but again, that was at the request of some folks who are subscribers to my channel. The Surangama Sutra, I'm in the middle of reciting that. We're using, Sean and I, the Charles Luck version, and while I'm uploading snippets using my voice as Ananda, our plan is for Sean to upload this with the Chinese and English text on the screen, but using my significant other, Charlotte, her voice as Ananda. So that'll be a multi-voice kind of offering that may be of interest to those of you who are focused in on this sutra, which has been widely promulgated and appreciated and revered, particularly in China. The Karanda Vyuha Sutra, another profound Mahayana sutra. I really enjoy listening to it. In Praise of the Buddha, that's a playlist that has multiple snippets, particularly from the Avatamsaka Sutra, that talk about the nature of Buddhahood and his qualities. The writings of Alfred Bloom, Dr. Bloom, he, as some of you know, is a Western Shin Buddhist who I have a lot of respect for. He passed away not that long ago, but I was given permission to recite his online offerings, and so he gives his perspective on Jodo Shinshu. The Avatamsaka Sutra, again, there's a lot of overlap between that and the snippets on Praise of the Buddha. I'll never be able to do the complete Avatamsaka. It's so huge, this flower garland sutra, but it's so wonderful as well and so encompassing, perhaps even greater in some ways than the Lotus Sutra, which is one, as many of you know, that I deeply revere. But if you're interested in this, Reverend Heng Shur of the Berkeley Buddhist Monastery has given a series of lectures on the Avatamsaka, and those, I believe, are available in podcast form and or in YouTube videos. Multi-voice Vimalakirti with subtitles. I mentioned the multi-voice approach. If you like the Vimalakirti, this has 4 or 5 voices. And again, Sean put this together based on his friends and as well my significant other. And it's a fun sutra and a profound one, really, that focuses in on non-dualism. And that might be one that you have an interest in seeing. Sunset and Burning Leaves. That was done by a local fellow who is an ordained person within the Buddhist tradition and who wrote this and gave me permission to transcribe it. And so it is sort of a generic Pure Land kind of thrust and may be of interest to some of you. Sutra of Complete Enlightenment. This is a great sutra. And I'll tell you, particularly the first 2 chapters on sudden enlightenment, but I'll tell you, here's a principle within my playlists, is for some of these things, I recited it once early on, and then I recited it again later on with a better microphone. So if you go to the playlist, you may see 2 or 3 different versions, and you might want to test and listen to one or another version to see which one appeals to you more. And again, sometimes there may be one version with photos of various Buddhist iconography, and in another there may be screenshots with English and Chinese text. So for this one, as well as like the Lotus Sutra and the Lankavatara Sutra, well, no, not the Lankavatara, the Lotus Sutra and a couple of the others, you may want to be aware to focus on the whole playlist to determine which version you most like and which one appeals to you the best. Pureland Sutras. These, of course, are primarily excerpts from the Sukhavati Sutras, the 3 sutras, including the larger sutra, which encompasses the 18th vow, all of the vows of Dharmakara Bodhisattva, as he was singing the praises of Lokesvara Raja and giving his vows in front of that Buddha in order to establish the basis for creating his pure land of bliss. Then we have the acalaacala channel help tips, and I'll put this one on that particular playlist. And then the Sutra of Queen Shamala, which I was not aware of until one of my subscribers made me aware of it, and I like it. It's, again, another Mahayana sutra. All the Mahayana sutras really, in some sense, communicate the same notions. Non-duality, sunyata, prajna, compassion, and also expedient means. And they do so through various parables, through various direct teachings. And so, check them out and find out which one or ones are most appealing. And those will be the ones that will hopefully give you great comfort as well as stimulate and inspire greater insight into the nature of reality and into the nature of yourself. The Vimalakirti Sutra, again, I mentioned that one before in multi-voice form. This is the playlist that has different versions of it for sure, and will be perhaps of interest in terms of some of the other versions. And then we've got the Prajnaparamita Ratna Guna Sama Yagatha. Sorry about that pronunciation, but this one has more of the Prajnaparamita teachings, which, underlie all of the various Mahayana perspectives, really. Prajna, wisdom, sunyata, non-duality. These are the themes, these sort of synonymous or interchanging. And then, of course, on the flip side, on the positive side, suchness, reality as it exists here and now. The Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch, another one where you'll find multiple versions. And that one, of course, just was completed, all 10 chapters, plus the preface, plus the economium, plus the appendix, uploaded with text, with Chinese and English text by Sean using my recitation. A very, very profound and widely revered sutra among particularly the Chan and Zen crowd. The Renyo letters, of course, Renyo was the follower about, I think, several generations after Shinran, who really sort of promulgated or propagated the Shin Buddhist ideology and doctrine and sort of simplified it and through his letters communicated to followers and helped them sort of understand the essence of Shin Buddhism and what it meant in terms of following that particular path. The Prajnaparamita Sutra in 700 lines. I personally love this one, and I listen to it over and over. And if I could recommend one to you, I would say check this one out, as well as perhaps the Diamond Sutra, where again, the Diamond Sutra playlist has multiple versions, but I have one in particular that I like, and look at them again in the context of the quality of the audio, because I have improved my microphone use over the course of time. The BDK Lotus Sutra Unabridged Recitation. So that is this version, which I got permission to recite. And the Lotus is just one of the best. What can I say? Between the doctrine of expedient means and then the revelation of the eternal life of the Buddha in chapter 16 is just fantastic. So I pulled this one out, but I also have a playlist on the Lotus Sutra, which has, again, multiple versions, multiple microphones. So see what you like the best. I've got a playlist on Samantabhadra. I love Samantabhadra. He is the Bodhisattva of universal virtue, universal worthy, the Bodhisattva of action. And in the Threefold Lotus Sutra, the third of the three is focused on meditation on Samantabhadra, who was said to protect and to look after those who in turn revere the Lotus Sutra, which is part of why I like him. But in the meantime, he's also one who I think has a almost separate chapter at the end of the Avatamsaka, the Gandhavyuha. Help me out with the pronunciation. But that section of the Avatamsaka Sutra contains his famous vows. And in this playlist, I think I recite those vows. The next one is the Tanisho recitation. While technically not written by Shinran, it is about Shinran, written by one of his disciples, Yenbo. And it's maybe one of the most revered Pure Land teachings, because it's very simple and yet very profound, and really communicates the essence of this path of pure grace. I've got a playlist called English Recitation, English and Chinese Subtitles. I've put some of Sean's videos in here, and his channel, by the way, is Dharma Chakra Wheel of Dharma channel. And I feature that channel on my acalaacala channel. So if you look over to the right on my homepage, you'll see a link to his channel. But I've included some of his videos in there, as well as some of the ones that he's bounced back to me without music that I in turn have uploaded to my channel. Shin Buddhist commentaries goes perhaps without explanation, because it's self-explanatory. Other Shin and faith-related videos, that's sort of a potpourri of things that I've thrown in there. Can you tell I'm getting a little bit tired? Okay, Shin Buddhist Profession of Faith. This is a reading of Reverend Kenryu Tsuji's Profession of Faith. And Reverend Tsuji is a person who was one of my mentors and who was a bishop of the Buddhist Churches of America, and later the minister at Ikoji Temple in the Washington, D.C. area, which, by the way, was supported by Numata in terms of its original funding, I believe. But the thing I would say there, too, is that it's a focus on this particular profession of faith that I'm having in my podcasts, my initial podcasts. And so you'll hear more reference to them there. But if you want to hear the complete recitation of this profession of faith, it's in this particular playlist. Buddhist stupa. So here, I built this, what I call a stupa. I labeled it the Amitayus, which means Buddha of infinite life. Of course, Amida Buddha. Amitayu stupa out in the wooded lot next to my house. And in this playlist, you'll see the sort of development of this stupa, this landscaping that I've done in various stages, which, as I say in one of the videos, that the neighbors like to call a sort of a meditation rock garden or something along that line. But there's a big 7,000-pound rock in there that I've actually had an inscription from the Lotus Sutra placed on it, as well as stones in the ground that have various mantras from different Buddhist traditions. So if you want to see some of that, it's kind of fun. And, I certainly enjoyed the hours and hours and hours that I spent sort of putting that together. as I did so as again, a devotional kind of activity in relation to my own spiritual life and development. There's a playlist on the Heart Sutra, the shortest of the Prajnaparamita Sutras, which is recited by many Buddhist groups daily. And here again, you'll find many translations from different translators. And it's a wonderful scripture that really gives the very essence of Mahayana Buddhism. The Lankavatara Sutra. Those of you who watch my channel know that I'm slogging through that bit by bit, which is a long-term project. That one will never be uploaded with text on the screen, but it's one that I really zeroed in on early in my conversion to Buddhism. And of course, the translation that I'm reciting is Suzuki's. There are parts of it that are hard to make sense of, but there are parts of it that are amazingly deep and profound. And I know there are some of you out there that are liking those snippets, and I'll continue to do those, and maybe someday get to the end of the Lankavatara Sutra. Okay, I've got a playlist called My Spiritual Journey if you want to learn more about me or what my history is in terms of my conversion to Buddhism. That's where you would find it. Sutra of Innumerable Meanings recitation. That's the first of the three in the Threefold Lotus Sutra. I love it, especially chapter 2. Really, when the Bodhisattvas ask, how can we sort of attain this ideal that you are describing, Buddha, he really gives it in so many words and very explicitly in terms of how beings discriminate between this versus that. So what you need to do is to, present it to them and this, that, and the other way. Because the meanings differ, preaching differs. And that's why I put so many variety of things on my video channel, on my YouTube channel. So I hope people who view the channel understand that that's where I'm coming from. Really, I'm trying to base what I do on the philosophy of what's articulated in the second chapter of the Innumerable Meanings Sutra, as well as the second chapter of the Lotus Sutra. And then we come to a wonderful playlist called Diamond Sutra Recitation. I've already mentioned it. It's the sutra that Huineng, the sixth patriarch of Zen Buddhism, heard when he was working in the fields and said, whoa, he became enlightened immediately. The Diamond Sutra, the Diamond Cutter of Doubts, is, and you you hear me talking in superlative terms about many of these things, but in terms of insight into the nature of reality and breaking through the tendency of our thinking mind to focus on breaking things down into this versus that, which it's really designed to do. This sutra has that potential, and I recommend it to you strongly. Then we have Lotus Sutra chapter summaries and commentaries. Those are mostly things that I have spun off in terms of various perspectives that I've had over the course of the years. And I did this series early on, and you may or may not find anything of interest there. There's a playlist called Mahayana Great Vehicle Buddhism, and I have thrown in the kitchen sink, as they say, into this one. So there's no rhyme or reason, but you just have to, sort of wade through it and see if there's anything that pulls you in. And so that's all I'm going to say about it. Then there's a playlist called Great Cosmic Bodhisattvas. So again, I've thrown a lot of different things in there. When I hear somebody like Avalokiteshvara, who are the great cosmic bodhisattvas? Avalokiteshvara, who's the bodhisattva that embodies infinite compassion and who is an emanation of Amida Buddha. Mahasamaprapta is the other cosmic bodhisattva who flanks Amida. And of course, he is a bodhisattva of wisdom. But the bodhisattva who represents infinite wisdom, or the embodiment of wisdom, is Manjushri Bodhisattva, who carries the sword to cut through the doubts, cut through the dualistic kind of thinking that we tend to have. I've mentioned Samantabhadra Bodhisattva. There's also Jizo Bodhisattva, or who's called Earth Store, or Kashiti-garbha Bodhisattva, who is very popular in Japan. He goes down into the hells to save people. And by the way, Avalokiteshvara, of course, saved people in all kinds of transformation forms. But Jizo, again, Jizo is also a protector of children, of travelers, of women, and is very popular if you like Jizo. Jan Chosen Bays, I believe her name is, out in Oregon, I believe she is. She's written a great book on Jizo Bodhisattva, and they really focus on him a lot out there at her particular temple. Bodhisattva Vows and Practices. Again, that's kind of a potpourri. Buddhist images. I kind of filled that up with some things early on because I love Buddhist art. I love Asian art of a Buddhist nature. And I've got many things, not super expensive things, but things I've picked up over the years, including at such, strange places as furniture stores or certainly antique stores. As well as online at places like eBay. So, I've gotten a lot of things. I enjoy it. It gives me pleasure. It gives me comfort to view. It's not that we Buddhists worship these, icons. And of course, Renyo, who I've mentioned, he made the case that while Buddhists like statues, they like paintings better than statues. And while Jodo Shinshu Buddhists like paintings, they like the name better than all of that. In other words, Namu Amida Butsu, or the 10-character name that Shinran used, which I like to do in English, which is, I take refuge in the Tathagata of inconceivable light. Again, in the spirit of ecumenicalism, if that's how the word is pronounced, I've got a playlist called Early or Theravadan Buddhism. And I have another one on Buddhist mantras and chants. So those may be of interest. I also have a playlist called Buddhist glossary terms, where I've sort of gone through and mentioned different words and sort of free associated my own crude understanding of what some of them may imply. I've not done as much of that as I had hoped, but I may get around to doing more. And then we have the Lotus Sutra recitation, a biggie, and one that I'm going to repeat it again. Not only that you should find the version that you like the best, but I'll mention again on a repeated basis that if you go to the playlist and you get one of them started, it will automatically go to the next one and the next one and the next one. So even though I don't have them all clumped into one video, you can gain the benefit of sort of going from one to another without manipulating your device, whatever it is, your cell phone or your computer, by simply getting it started within a playlist. And then I've got one called Favorites. I think what I put in there is what I want to be played when I die at my memorial service. But right now I'm going to let this video die because it's gone on way too long. And I hope that there's been something of interest and of use to you. And again, thank you for watching my videos. Thank you for subscribing if you have. And especially thank you if you've taken the time to comment, to give me feedback so that I can gear this thing in a way that best meets the needs of people who appreciate the Buddha Dharma. Namo Mita Butsu. Namo Mita Butsu.